Hello, everyone. Welcome. Thank you for coming. My name is Marissa. I'm the marketing coordinator for our group of Mathnasiums, and I'll be handling the Q&A for today. So if you have any questions, please type them into the Q&A at any point, and we can get those answered for you. And without further ado, I'm going to turn this over to Billy for his presentation.
Thank you, Marissa, and thanks everybody for coming in. My name is Billy Rothert. I am the Center Director of Mathnasium of Tuckahoe in Richmond, Virginia. I just want to give just another quick big thanks to Marissa because without any of her prep and advertising for this would not be possible. And it's immensely helpful to have someone moderating questions for you so that I don't have to watch the chat simultaneously. So, big jazz hands for Marissa there. So welcome to my discussion. Today, we're going to be talking about a topic that I think is kind of undersung in academia today. It's a really important math concept, and as math is one of the core subjects in K through 12 academics, this topic needs to be addressed. So the title of my talk is "My Number Senses Are Tingling," which is going to talk about the impact of early age number sense and numerical fluency, specifically on K through 8 mathematics. I really want to look at what's happening in grades K1 and 2, and to a lesser extent, grades K through 5, and how that impacts a student's math career for the rest of their K through 12 life. But I'm kind of narrowing the focus here a little bit. I really want to talk about K through 8 mathematics. So some of the things we're going to talk about today are, what is number sense? What does that mean? What is numerical fluency? What does that mean? How are these things different from basic computational math skills? Why should we care about this? And where does all this stuff come from? Okay, so first thing I want to do is actually have just a quick poll. So if Marissa could get that ready. The general question here is, how many of you have ever heard someone say that they're just not really a math person? Someone who said, I'm not really a math person. Who has heard someone say that before? Give me just a few more seconds to answer. Do we have any results coming in now, Marissa?
Yes. So I think we're so far at 100%. Yes, they've heard somebody say they're not
Right.
a math
So
person.
someone has said to you before, you know what, I'm just really not a math person. Okay, so my question is, when did that become okay? When did it become socially acceptable for someone to say, I'm not really a math person? So imagine this. What if you came across a person and through analyzing their professional and social skills, they said something to you like, like, I'm really great at spreadsheets and stuff, but I'm just not really a literacy person. I don't do that whole, spoken word and reading and writing thing. It's just like not for me, really. That would sound ridiculous to you. And you would probably think a lot less of that person, like professionally and socially, as a result of someone saying, I'm just not a literacy person. So when someone says, I'm not a math person, that sounds just as bizarre and absurd to me. Okay, so now here's where we get to the meat and potatoes here. A lot of people think that being a math person is some kind of like divine gift that is bestowed upon some and not to others. And that is complete rubbish. Contrary to popular belief, being a math person can be taught. It's not an innate gift. It is a skill that can be trained, taught, and learned. But what are we actually training people for? Okay, now the simple answer here is algebra. The more complicated answer is like the contemporary workforce, but we're just going to focus on school for now. Essentially, everything from grades K through 8 is aiming towards preparing a student for Algebra 1. And in the same respect, we could say that everything taught in math from Algebra 1, Algebra 2, geometry, trig, all those classes are aiming towards calculus. So in the same respect, K through 8's aiming towards Algebra 1, all those high school classes are aiming towards calculus. Why should we care about training students in these skills, right? Number sense, numerical fluency. Why do we care about them? Because it seems like people got along just fine without needing number sense or numerical fluency in the past. And the truth is, that's right? Any of you in the audience that are of the age where you probably have children in grade school, I would guarantee none of you were taught number sense or numerical fluency. None of your parents were taught number sense and numerical fluency. They got along just fine. That's not so true today. Math has genuinely changed quite a lot in schools, most notably in the last 2 to 3 decades. And it's kind of a rabbit hole to even discuss how that happened, but I think it's worth it to give a little bit of historical context, and I'll do that in just a few minutes. The biggest reason why math is so strange to get your hands around today is because there's no centralized mathematics curriculum that everybody learns in our nation. You see, the United States Constitution, which is essentially the single document that governs how our country is run, it governs most of our political systems, has nothing to say or do about how education or curriculum is designed in our country. There is no federal regulation of math and reading. Now, the United States government has some contribution to education, but typically it's just in the matter of funding, and it's surprisingly less than you might think. I think on average right now, the federal government is only responsible for about 8 to 9% of the money that public schools receive. The overwhelming majority comes from state and local governments. And what money the federal government does give to schools is almost 100% allocated towards programs like Title I, for example, or any of these like No Child Left Behind, or I think it's now called like Every Student Succeeds or something like that. They've rebranded No Child Left Behind since it was originally created. But that's the kind of stuff that the federal government contributes to, but everything else is left up to the states. So by that token, the United States behaves kind of like 50 little individual countries when it comes to education. And I think math suffers the most from that structure, how our nation is organized. Now, there's definitely some overlap state by state, right? No one's going to contest in Mississippi versus California that 2 + 2 is 4. That's all right. That's kind of a fact, okay? But the way it's taught is vastly different. And that's where we get into some of the philosophy of education and the historical context here. And it's kind of a rabbit hole, but I think it's really important for what our core topic of discussion is today. So let's talk just a little bit about history, okay? So we've got a lot of historical context behind where math comes from and how the math of our history shaped the math that we're seeing today. So math is ancient, right? Back to like near prehistoric times. But we don't need to go back that far for our discussion today. It seems like the Enlightenment era is about as far back as we need to go for our purposes, which takes us through like the 17 and 1800s. Okay, this era is what gave us stuff like the scientific method. Great scholars like Isaac Newton and Rene Descartes influenced the academic landscape for math and science, and it really built the foundational bedrock upon which all math and science is built today. So the sort of Enlightenment stuff took us through the sort of 1800s, and from the late 1800s, like I'd say like really late 1800s up through the 1950s, one of the most popular models for education, specifically in mathematics, was an educational philosophy called constructivism. It's not in use right now, but it's what my parents learned when they were in school. Well, my dad, not my mom so much, we'll get into that later. But it's what my dad learned when he went to school. And it was popularized up through the sort of mid to late 1950s. It was designed by folks like John Dewey, Maria Montessori, and Jean Piaget. Some of you may even know things like, Montessori schools are in the Richmond area. That's a school that is based on constructivist educational philosophies. But something weird happened in the late 50s in the United States. And we can kind of link this to the Sputnik crisis. And now you're going to think, all right, Billy, you're like a conspiracy theorist now. This is absolutely crazy, but just hear me out. So the Sputnik crisis happened in the late 50s and into the early 60s. And we thought to ourselves, our national rivals are doing much better than us in science and technology, it seems. The United States must be falling behind the times. In response, we got together a bunch of scientists and real math and science nerd people that created what you know as new math. Okay? New math was this shift of thinking and how we taught kids in school based on stuff like set theory, Boolean logic, these crazy abstract math concepts. It was awful, and everybody made fun of new math. I mean, it's almost a meme today. You make fun of the new math. Well, new math is gone. It was pretty much completely dead by the 70s. New math was almost entirely extinct. But because we shifted from these really well-established constructivist models from essentially the late 1800s into up to about 1950, new math replaced that, new math died, and nothing really good took its place. So a lot of the 70s and 80s were kind of a free-for-all academically, especially in mathematics. Now, one of the most prominent educational philosophies in the 1970s was something called the Summerhill model, proposed by a gentleman named Alexander Sutherland Neill. Now, it had its own problems, though, and there's a reason why probably none of you know what the system is all about. You see, the 70s, as many of you might know, was a decade in which our country was sort of against the idea of structure and authority. And the Summerhill model was an ultra-progressive educational movement based on similar principles against structure and authority, where students could effectively choose what they wanted to learn. And we can probably guess how well that worked out. So from the end of that Sputnik era new math through this weird gap of Summerhill math in the 70s that didn't work out, it sort of spurred the nation into this idea of, wow, we really need to get a national standard. There needs to be some kind of national standard in place that unifies all of our schools in the United States. This didn't start happening until I'd say, early to mid 1980s. And that's when we really had the dawn of creating a national standard. There was a few different attempts made, but one of the most successful systems was something called everyday math. And this system is actually still in place in many schools today. You might hear of people and their kids doing something called everyday math. First pioneered in the 80s, really implemented for the first time kind of in the 90s. But there's been a new version of everyday math pretty much every decade since its inception. Now, this was initially developed to be sort of a back to basics approach. And it has pros and cons, but it was the only thing that was even close to a national standard at the time. Then we get this thing in sort of the mid to late 90s, sort of a new push for national standards, something that we call now Common Core. Okay, so many of you have probably heard of what Common Core is, but Common Core originally was designed, it started to be designed kind of in the kind of in the late, like mid to late 90s, and then it was again sort of iterated and refined over and over again, probably every decade until today. Okay, so Common Core, people have criticisms of Common Core, and rightfully so, but it's our best attempt at a national standard. However, when it was proposed, it was optional for each state whether or not it was going to adopt Common Core. And guess which state did not choose to adopt Common Core? That's right, our very own Commonwealth of Virginia chose to reject all of Common Core standards. Now, there might be some schools, depending on what county or city you live in, that could adopt maybe pieces of it or sort of hybrids of it, because each state and local government kind of controls their own education standards. But within a mile of where I'm sitting here, kind of in the west end of Richmond, you've got schools that are doing everyday math, schools that are doing hybrids of Common Core. Richmond City, I think, is going to start doing something new, which I think is a hybrid version of something called Eureka Math. Collegiate is teaching everyday math. St. Catherine's is teaching Singapore math in schools. We've got Montessori schools in this area. So basically a little taste of everything from the last 100 years is being taught in Virginia. Okay, so this is troubling, right? Like, what do we do? How do we help our students sort of navigate this academic landscape where it could be peaks and valleys and different kinds of curriculums? Like, what do we do? The answer to that question is teaching students number sense and numerical fluency. Okay, so here's where we really get to the core of our discussion today. What is number sense? What is numerical fluency? And why do these things matter? Okay, so number sense and numerical fluency on a surface level. Number sense and numerical fluency are the things that persist and survive regardless of what math curriculum is being taught. That is the most fundamental mathematical principles that exist agnostic of what curriculum or state or county you live in. The best way to talk about numerical fluency and number sense, we'll start with number sense here, is to do a comparison using linguistics and language, because I think it'll sort of articulate what I mean when I talk about number sense. So, has anyone ever heard before that much of our communication is actually nonverbal, right? And some quick research brought me to this kind of pie chart representation here. And some of you might have seen it before. It's sometimes used in professional or business scenarios. We'd say that when we want to convey an idea to somebody, right, the methods by which we communicate our ideas to people, about 55% of our idea is conveyed through the use of body language, which includes stuff like eye contact, our posture, like our physical gestures of like our hands and body. About 38% of our idea is conveyed through the tone of our speech, which includes like our charisma, the delivery of our speech, essentially like the performance of how we give our ideas to someone. And only 7% of our meaning is conveyed through the actual words, the actual transcript of our speech written down somewhere. So there's a very tiny portion of communication that relies on the actual words that we say. Now, it's not that different when doing mathematics. For example, in this new pie chart, just rote mathematical computation makes up that tiny sliver, that 7% of math, or something similar to it, is your actual computational ability. Your ability to do like multiplication and division and fractions. That's how much those skills get you towards being a math person. The other 93% of solving a math problem is number sense and numerical fluency. Okay, let's dig into number sense right now. So number sense is sort of an intuition that allows you to navigate a math problem. Okay, could be from the 50s, the 70s, the 90s, doesn't matter. Number sense is your math intuition. Now, navigation is the best way to describe this because number sense establishes your orientation within a given math problem. It helps you understand where you are currently and the direction you need to go to get to the result of the math problem. Number sense answers the question, what kind of math problem is this? What are they ultimately asking me to do here? And what kind of information do I have from my previous math understanding, like the context of my math history, that can help me solve this problem? Now, I think number sense is broken up into 4 major components, and I'll unravel them a little bit here. The first pillar of number sense is interval counting. Okay, so interval counting is the ability to count from any number to any number by any number interval forwards and backwards. This topic permeates all levels of math from pre-K to calculus and beyond, because every time we count 1, 2, 3 in elementary school, or do patterns, or every time we plot the slope of a line in algebra, or if we do stuff like sums, series, and sequences in calculus, it's all fundamentally a principle of counting. There's even something called the fundamental counting principle. It's like one of the most core mathematical theories you learn in like high school. And it's all related to how we do counting. So counting is a huge part of number sense. You can say, this to me looks fundamentally like a counting kind of problem to me. Okay, the next pillar is wholes and parts. So the wholes and parts piece here says we can break things down, we can perform some mathematical operations, we can put them back together again. And we do that every time we do addition with carrying. We have to carry some numbers to a new place value. We do some wholes and parts there. Every time we do subtraction with borrowing, again, we sort of break apart a place value, take a 10 from here, add it to the ones, and we do some carrying there for wholes and parts. Every time we do fractions in late elementary or early middle school, every time we factor a polynomial in algebra, every time we graph some functions piecewise in calculus, we're doing wholes and parts theory. The next pillar of number sense is proportional reasoning, which is the idea that numbers can have relationships that rely on multiplication and essentially scale, right? It's the baseline upon which multiplication is founded, and it's how we do things like make equivalent fractions, reduce fractions. It's basically everything we do in geometry related to scope or scale, or similarity and congruence. And it relates to your economics courses. Do stuff like macro and microeconomics in college level classes. Like these things stretch all through kindergarten up through graduate level work, the idea of proportional reasoning and scaling. And the last topic here is inverse operations. It's fundamentally an idea that would say, for pretty much any mathematical operation you can perform, there is some operation that does the exact opposite of that. Right? In this case, addition is the opposite of subtraction. Multiplication is the opposite of division. Exponents are the opposite of square roots. Exponential functions are inverse of logarithms, derivatives, and integrals up in the calculus realm. Okay, we see how this stretches all the way from kindergarten up to calculus. These skills here, interval counting, wholes and parts, proportional reasoning, inverse operations, they permeate all areas of mathematics, regardless of what curriculum your student is learning, regardless of what school they go to, what state or county they live in. So when a student sits down and they look at a new math problem for homework that night, I don't want any of my students to say, wow, this math problem is entirely new. I've never seen anything like this before. I have nothing that can help me solve this question. Rubbish, not true. I want my students to say, oh, hey, you know what? This seems like a proportions question to me. What kind of proportions skills do I have in my mathematical background that can help me understand and unpack what this question wants me to do? Or say, hey, you know what? Fundamentally, this seems like a wholes and parts problem to me. I know all kinds of things about wholes and parts. I have this great contextual wealth of knowledge behind me that I can use to orient myself and navigate a particular word problem. You see, so many students, when they learn something, especially learn something new, and I think this is most true in late elementary and through middle school, a student learns something new, and so they build this sort of island in their mind and say, all right, I'm learning something new. I'm going to put all my knowledge about this on this little island, and it's going to sit there in the ocean of my mind and has no bridges to connect to absolutely anything. It's like isolated, a new concept. That's not actually how it works. There should be bridges connecting all these little concepts in our mind because math builds upon itself. All these concepts are connected. So when a student that has great number sense approaches a word problem, they have this awesome navigator's sense, this sort of navigation intuition to say, I know what this word problem is asking me to do. I know where I'm starting here. I know where I'm supposed to go. And I know how much information I have to fall back on to make me feel comfortable and confident when I approach this question. So that's a brief introduction to what number sense is. What about numerical fluency? Okay, how is that different? Okay, so we talked about how number sense is the practice of navigation. Okay, well, any good navigator needs to have a set of tools. So the instruments in your toolbox are the really specific skills that I want your students to know to facilitate the journey from the start of the math problem to the end of the math problem. So Mathnasium identifies about 10 of these really core numerical fluency skills that are most applicable for students in grades K through 2. Does it mean that numerical fluency doesn't happen in grades 3 through 8 and beyond? I mean to say that this is the bedrock upon which numerical fluency is built. And if I mention any of these topics and you think to yourself, like my student has shown me some struggle in that area. I've watched my student do some finger counting when I ask them questions like that. Maybe you should consider if your student has a well-stocked toolkit for how to approach math questions. So I mentioned 10 topics of numerical fluency. And they're kind of broken into subsets of 2 groups of 5. So the first topic, or the first set of 5 topics, is about as simple as it gets for numerical fluency. You can see them here on the screen. It starts off with addition facts. two numbers that are added together where the answer is less than 10, okay? That's about as foundational as it gets. Add two numbers together, the sum is less than 10. Examples: 5 plus 2, 3 plus 6, 4 plus 4 plus 1, right? These are simple math concepts. How does your student think about these math concepts? Are they finger counting to do this? Are they making little dash marks or tally marks on a piece of paper to count? Or do they have elegant and efficient techniques to do this in their head? Okay, the next question here, decomposing numbers. That's essentially saying the number 7 breaks apart into two pieces. If one of them is a 4, what's the other piece going to be? Okay, that's the foundational bedrock upon which wholes and parts theory is built. It's also a student's first introduction to how fractions work. Oh, sorry, not fractions, subtraction. It's a student's first introduction to how subtraction works, because they understand that you can take away a piece and be left with something remaining. We then go into things like 10 plus a one-digit number, which is the introduction to those teens numbers, right? 10 plus 3, 6 plus 10, 10 plus 9. Those are great examples of 10 plus a one-digit number concepts. We then go into doubles facts. Now, doubles facts are really cool because they're the introduction to fractions, okay? The first fraction that anybody learns is half, okay? And we can go from a doubles fact, like 7 plus 7 is 14, to say, well, what is now half of 14? And do the reverse of that fact. So by teaching a student doubles, you then open the door to their very first fraction, which is 1/2. Finally, here we get to complements of 10. This is a really important concept because what numbers go together to make 10 is a critical piece for the next 5 topics of numerical fluency. Students got to know what numbers go together to make 10. 6 goes with what? 4. 2 goes with what? 8, right? That's what I'm looking for when I talk about numerical fluency with a student. So the next 5 topics are a bit more complex. They include things like adding two numbers where the sum is now greater than 10, okay? How might a student solve one of these questions? Okay, a student might think to themselves, well, I know that 7 plus 7 is 14 because I mastered my doubles facts. 7 plus 8 should be one bigger than that because I know how to iterate numbers because of my counting numerical fluency, and sorry, my counting number sense. Students also get their first introduction to subtraction here, proper subtraction, where we have a single digit number minus a single digit number, and the answer is still positive, right? We don't cross below 0 yet. 9 minus 7, good example of that. We ask questions like missing addends, right? 8 plus something else makes 13. Okay, how do we fill in that blank? Well, one good example of how a student might do this is appealing to their previous numerical fluency concepts. That's the first time a student uses number sense. A student might say, I can't do 8 plus blank is 13. I've never seen that before. And I would say, oh, wait, but you have. Because you know that 8 plus 2 makes 10. And 10 plus 3 gets you to 13. And those two things you added, the 2 to get to 10 and the 3 to get to 13, 2 plus 3 makes 5. Here we just used topics 1, 3, and 5 to solve that question, right? 8 plus blank makes 13. That's the first time a student can start using the number sense that we teach them, saying, I have a mathematical context to fall back on and helps me answer this question. We then get to things like subtraction facts, where we cross over that boundary of 10, right? 14 minus 6 makes 8, and that cross to the 10 boundary, challenging for a student to do, is cross that 10 boundary. And then we go into the final topic here of missing subtrahends, similar to topic number 8, where we have a sort of a blank in the middle of the question. 11 minus blank gives you 5, sort of cross that gap in the middle. These are the tools in the toolbox that any student in grades K through 2 should have in order to flourish and be really successful in their K through 5 academic life, and then beyond to K through 8 in algebra and beyond. Okay, so this is a good crash course into what numerical fluency is talking about. It's the tools that are in your toolkit that make you elegant and efficient with answering questions. Okay, let's unpack that a little bit. Elegant and efficient. Why do I care about that stuff? So when I want students to learn a math topic and it to be an elegant technique, elegance means that a student can do it with as few steps as possible, which reduces, oh, sorry, I got those backwards. Elegancy means that they're using higher order math techniques that can apply to other concepts later, right? Things that help them learn something in the future. That's an elegant math technique. It appeals to some other area of math in the future. An efficient math technique has the fewest number of steps, which reduces the possibility for careless or computational mistakes. So I want both of those things to happen. Here's some examples of how those are not achieved, okay? Let's say a student wants to do 3 plus 5, okay? And they count on their fingers 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. That was very fast, very efficient, but not very elegant. Finger counting doesn't link up to any advanced math concept in the future. Finger counting is like training wheels for like addition and subtraction. You need to get off those as soon as you possibly can. And in general, efficiency is what we're trying to increase by getting a student off of finger counting. Sorry, elegancy is what we're trying to increase by getting a student off of finger counting. So what do I mean when I'm aiming for elegancy and a student is missing the efficiency? Let's say a question like 9 plus 6, for example. Maybe a student recognizes that 9 plus 6, those two numbers are multiples of 3. So maybe they'll do something like, all right, I've got a 9, that's 3 3s, and a 6, and that's 2 3s, and now I can start counting 3 plus, okay, 1, 2, 3, that's 6, that's 9, that's 12, that's 15, okay? And by doing that, they've made this problem a lot more complex than it has to be. Yes, they're appealing to things like interval counting and the baseline for multiplication, but they've added about 5 more extra steps than they need to get that question solved for. And so those two examples are where we have elegancy but not efficiency, or efficiency but not elegance. And I want students to have techniques that are both elegant and efficient to really flesh out their toolkit for how to solve questions well in K through 2 and up through K through 5. So that's the general idea behind number sense, behind numerical fluency, why these things are important, and sort of the history behind it. So in closing here, number sense and numerical fluency are the skills that your student needs to navigate the academic landscape that is subject to change depending on what city or county you live in, or what curriculum your student is being taught. And number sense and numerical fluency are these things that survive and persist through those changes. So by teaching students number sense and numerical fluency, they're able to build great math skills, transform into a math person, and do that regardless of what kind of curriculum your student is faced with. So thanks everybody for joining us. I want to open up for any Q&A if people have any questions for me. I'll try to be brief and concise with my answers.
Okay, if y'all have any questions, please go ahead and type them into the Q&A. It should be like a button at the bottom of your screen, so we can go ahead and get those answered for you. And I just wanted to add, because I see that Billy has his contact information on the screen. Feel free definitely to reach out to us at any point if you have any questions about this. But if you are more interested in the program and you're not from this area, feel free to just reach out to your local center as well. You can go to mathnasium.com and it'll help you find that right away.
Mm-hmm.
And then we've got a question. So first question is, which grade is this kind of thing meant for?
Good question. So let's talk about number sense first. Number sense applies to all grade levels, K through 12. Numerical fluency, the topics that I just showed you, are most focused on grades K through 2, but I have given numerical fluency curriculum to any student, perhaps grade K through 5. Because when a person comes to Mathnasium and they say, all right, I need some help, my student wants to get a little bit stronger in mathematics, and I start working with that 4th grader who's still finger counting, I'm thinking, oh, buddy, it seems like we got to do some numerical fluency work here. But when should a student have these things mastered? That kind of differs from one child to the next. But I think my best answer for this is grades K 1 and 2 is when a student should have these 10 topics of numerical fluency mastered.
Okay, next question is, how can I tell if my kid is good at this? For background, they are in 3rd grade.
That's a good question. Some things that you want to look for, let me rephrase. There's a way that you can tell if your kid is bad at this, and then you'll know if you have to make any corrections, but then I'll try to answer, how do you know if your kid is good at this? So you can know if your kid's bad at this stuff if you ask them, what's 8 plus 5? And the fingers come out, okay? Ask your kid, what's 8 plus 5? And they have to grab a piece of paper and draw a big old number line and make some like hops across the numbers. Like if they have to physically draw it out, they probably need more help with numerical fluency. If your student is asked, hey, what's 8 plus 5? And it takes them like 20 seconds to articulate some kind of word journey that they can't really tell you about and makes no sense, your kid probably needs help in numerical fluency. If your student is good at these kind of questions, the first indicator is going to be speed. They're going to answer the question quickly, but don't just stop there. If your kid can answer these simple math questions fast, that does not guarantee that they're using elegant or efficient techniques. They might be just very, very good and sneaky about finger counting. For example, I've worked with kids that are so fast at finger counting, they can just have their hand like this and go, boom, and they finger counted all the way up to their answer already. So ask your student, oh, that's great. You said 8 plus 5 is 13. How did you do that? What did you think about when you did 8 plus 5 to make 13? And if your kid can say something elegant and efficient like, well, I broke apart that 5 into a 2 and a 3. 8 goes to 2 to make 10. 10 plus 3 makes 13. 8 plus 5 is 13. That's quick, efficient, great explanation. It appealed to wholes and parts. It appealed to counting. It was an appeal to number sense of like prerequisite skills that they've learned before. That would be some indicators of a student who's got a really good handle on numerical fluency. So I hope that answered your question about how do I find out if my kid needs help with this, but how do I identify if the kid's really good at this? I'd say in general, it's easier to identify a student who's struggling with numerical fluency. It's a little bit harder to find out if your kid is really talented in numerical fluency. But the indicators are going to be there both ways. So it just takes a little bit of a sharper eye.
Yeah, and I'd add that definitely asking how is super important. Just how they got their answer for anything.
Yes.
Okay, so we'll hang out for a minute just in case there's any more questions. I don't have any typed in right now. But thank you everybody for coming. I really hope that you got something from this and learned a little bit of new things about either the history of math or numerical fluency and number sense. And thank you, Billy, for giving us this lovely information.
Yeah, absolutely. I was really happy to have this talk. I've had a lot of Mathnasium parents hear some of these rantings from me before, so it really is an enlightening topic when you realize where math came from in our country and how our history, like sort of the nation of our history, crafted how math is today.